And so, like I said, welcome. My name is Cheryl Lee Swady. Um, you guys know me maybe through different places. Some of you are people that I know through business groups, and some of you may have read my book or listened to a podcast, but we've never had the chance to really talk, maybe a lot of you. So I have a Bachelor of Education, English education. I'm a former teacher. I started teaching high school and then I dropped into sixth grade teaching for 5 years. 4 years ago, I wrote a book on the topic of remarriage. My goal was to help couples who struggled with second marriages like my husband and I had. Since then, I've written 2 more books and many blog posts on the topic. I also have a podcast. Um, I have a podcast called Happily Ever After Again, and I talk about marriage and marriage transformation. It's something I'm very passionate about. A little bit about me, my personality type is INFP, so that is actually called the healer type. My top strengths, according to the Strengths Finder, are input, strategy, intellection, empathy, and developer. I am a good listener, and I'm passionate about relationships and developing people's potential. And I've just recently started coaching and taken some coaching training. And I do have a program that I have set up that I will be sharing about with you at the end of the presentation. So let me just ask you, do you need a marriage reset? You might need a marriage reset if your spouse walks in the house and you have to ask for ID because you haven't talked for so long. When the two of you start to discuss something, your kids go and get their earbuds because they know it will get loud. You might need a marriage reset if your neighbors avoid eye contact with you because they're embarrassed to know all your personal life from your arguing late at night. And you might need a marriage reset if your marriage counselor just bought a Mercedes. So I am kidding. Just kidding. This is all in fun, but seriously ask yourself if you might be in need of a marriage reset. Are any of the following true for your marriage? You're wondering why you even got married. Most of your communication is either hostile or just of necessity, kids, money, schedules, and rarely, if ever, intimate. You feel like you and your spouse don't really know each other. A past marriage, grief, or trauma is still affecting you and your marriage today. So what is a marriage reset? Well, like the reset button on your modem or computer, a marriage reset is starting over, but not with a new person, with the same person. It's learning to look at your marriage in a fresh way. It's learning new ways to communicate and manage conflict. 11 years ago, my husband and I needed a marriage reset too. We got married on March 22nd, 2008. It was a second marriage for both of us. It was a chilly spring day, a small wedding, and like I said, we both been married before. He had 2 boys, aged 12 and 14, and I had no kids, and I think we all look really scared here. So maybe we kind of knew what was coming. 2 years into our marriage, we were close to a divorce. We were fighting constantly, yelling, crying, giving each other the silent treatment for days at a time. And the worst part is the boys hurt us too. We tried to hide it, but it was happening far too frequently and loudly to conceal it. It was very frustrating. We knew it was wrong, but we didn't know how to stop. The worst night of our marriage was a night Vern told me to get out, and I ran out of the house crying hysterically. I drove to our church elder's house and asked them to speak to us. We didn't know it, but that night was the beginning of our marriage reset. Because we reached out, and that's always the first step. After we reached out for help, our journey had begun. Today, we are a much different couple. In fact, the couple who helped us that night can't believe how much our relationship has changed. Instead of constant arguments, we're playful and loving with each other. We're close emotionally and best friends. The marriage reset goes over the steps that we took to go from let's divorce to happily married. And so this is the marriage reset roadmap. But the marriage reset goes through 7 steps. And I just want to emphasize that these aren't always going to be exactly in this order. I put them in the order that works for me in my head and sort of as to what happened with us. But everybody's going to be different. So you're not necessarily going to go through them sequentially, and you're not necessarily going to go through each one. But they do give you some milestones to look at of how to improve in your relationship. Okay, so we're going to get started on these. Preview of them, and then we'll go one by one. So number 1 is reach out. Stop being isolated, reach out for help and get support from others. So whenever we, we're going through a hard time in our life, reaching out is always the first step for most things. Number 2, remember who you are. Remember your own passions and purpose that may have gotten lost in the fighting and arguing. Number 3, remember the reasons that you got married. What drew you to your spouse in the first place? Number 4, heal from the past. Heal from hurts and trauma from your past so you can start seeing your partner through today rather than through your past, the lens of your past. Number 5, quench the fighting. Learn strategies for quenching arguments with your spouse. Number 6, build your romance keys. And I call the romance keys friendship, emotional intimacy, and lovemaking. And then number 7 is embrace your differences. Learn how to make your differences your strength. So the first one is reaching out for help. And a couple of people said that that can be the hardest step. And I shared a little bit, but when my husband and I were at our worst, my husband said to get out. And I kind of see that as the worst point in our marriage. And what I did at that point, what he did was, I would say we were both abusive with each other, just very, harsh arguing. And I was so upset at him saying that to me that I actually went and I just drove through my tears to visit some elders at our church. And I stood there with tears just running down my face and asked them to help us. And that was the hardest thing, probably, not the hardest, but one of the hardest things I've ever done is to reach out, because it was very embarrassing. They knew us, but they didn't know us that way. And so we sat in their living room, we cried, and we had to let somebody in. Then they recommended a counselor for us, and that was really the first step. But it was really hard. But when you can admit that you need help, reach out to someone else. It does a few things. First of all, you're admitting to God that you need help. You're saying, I can't handle this on my own. And you're also letting someone else into your picture. And it changes whenever we have somebody else looking at our picture with us. That changes the whole dynamic of it. We're no longer just completely alone. Studies show that marriage education does make a difference. And they've done a lot of studies over the years to say, because they give funding to marriage education, and they say that overall, not that every single couple necessarily is helped by it, but overall, the majority of couples are helped when they get some help. Okay, the next step I put is step 2 is remember who you are. Now, when my husband and I were at our worst, we were a step family, so we had extra complications. And I found it really overwhelming. I really forgot who I was during that time. And I didn't really do much that was for me. I did my job. I took care of the house. I took care of the kids. But I wasn't doing anything just for me that I enjoyed. And one thing I started to do is I started to write a blog, and I started to do a little creative hobby I called Polyvore. And every Saturday I would take a couple of hours and just sit in the middle. At the time we lived in a little mobile home, and all I had was this little desk in the kitchen, and I just sit there for about 2 hours and just get engrossed in my little hobbies that I found. And it was really powerful for me. My husband would glare at me because he didn't know why I was wasting so much time, but it was something that really helped me. So I just, for this step, I really encourage you to remember who you are and just ask, are you doing things in your life that you're passionate about? Has the chaos of your situation made it hard to remember who you are? And one of the writers that I appreciate, Empowered Wife, she says that you should do 3 things a day that are like self-care or things you enjoy. But even if you just start with once a week for a couple of hours, that's a good place to start. Just start doing something that gives you joy and that you're passionate about. And that can help you feel better about your own situation and what's going on in your marriage. Now, step number 3 is remember why you got married. So the first time that I spoke to my husband, we met online, and I asked God if I could marry him. And he was the most kind, compassionate man that I've ever spoken with. He was really easy to talk to. And I have actually heard a lot of people say that when they met the one, they had a similar feeling and that they didn't actually take long to get married. And we just kind of know. But when we were arguing nonstop, I just completely lost sight of the man that I had actually asked God to marry. So just think about, and when you're thinking of a marriage reset, think about what made you fall in love. What were your partner's qualities that made you say, I can't do without that? What made him or her the one who convinced you to put everything on the line? And then what did you want when you got married? What were you looking for? Do you still want those things? Now, when we get married for a reason. Like maybe we want a friend. Maybe we want romance. Maybe we want a partner. But there's certain things, everybody has things that they're really looking for. Maybe we want all of that, but there's things that we really look for. So, and sometimes I think we're scared to ask those questions because it reminds us that we don't have it. So we're scared to ask that. But when you can ask yourself that question, what did I want when I got married? You're opening yourself up to develop a vision of your marriage. And when we have a vision, that motivates us, even inside, that changes our thinking and changes our mindset. Okay, the next step is step 4, and this is heal from the past. So when my husband and I got married, both of us had been married before. We'd also come out of some long-term relationships that didn't work out in between our marriages. And we both thought that we were ready to remarry, but we were still hurting. And all of that came out in very toxic ways towards each other in those first years, I should say. And we were in a second marriage, but that's not the only thing that can cause hurt from the past. Chances are, if two people are in a troubled marriage, that one of them is probably hurting from something that happened. It can be our childhood. It could be even past marriages or past relationships. It could have been something in the marriage itself that has happened that we're not able to heal with. And our counselor helped us heal in a lot of deep ways through our childhood, from past marriages. And it took a long time. But what I'm suggesting for a marriage reset is it's not going to happen necessarily all at once, but to get started on the process can take time. But to get started and make that one of the ways to help your marriage, because when you're hurting, like, and it's maybe cliche, but hurting people hurt others. And when we're hurting, it's really hard to do the skills sometimes that we need to be a better partner. Okay. Step number 5 is quench the fighting. Now, when we're arguing a lot, it's really hard to think about romance or how much we love the person or communication. Like, it's just it sort of overwhelms everything else when we're fighting a lot. And when I say quench the fighting, I think this can be sometimes a long process for people to learn. And it comes a lot from what we learned as children, the way we saw our parents communicate. And it takes a long time to necessarily change those behaviors, but we can start learning strategies, and the goal is to fight less and to fight better. And then maybe down the road, we will get where we're not arguing, but fight better and fight less. John Gottman, he's one of the most well-respected marriage researchers and writers. Okay, he talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and he calls it criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And they did a lot of studies and that on marriages that found if these 4 things were present in a marriage, that the chances of divorcing were much, much higher. So I'm going to go through a couple of these and give some suggestions on how we can stop doing these things. So the first one is criticism. If you can start avoiding criticism in your marriage, that can go a long, long ways to making it better. So one of the ways that our counselor taught us was to use I statements instead of you statements. So when you're criticizing someone, you're saying you, for example, you never do the dishes. But instead, if you were to say, I'd love some help with the dishes at nights when I'm so tired, you're saying what you would love, what you need, but you're not pointing a finger. In this picture, you see this guy and he's pointing a finger at her. And whenever we're pointing a finger, and we do it because we feel hurt, right? But if we can even stop ourselves from being less critical, that can go a really long ways. The other one I would focus on here is defensiveness. And this is a really hard one. I know I found this probably the hardest one to overcome. And even now I catch myself sometimes, but I'm much, much better than I was. And being defensive is just automatically shooting back when someone says something to you, shooting back that you didn't do it. So what you do when you're defensive is you're giving the message that you're perfect and that you would never do anything wrong. And that can be just as bad as criticism. So those are some strategies that, when you're looking at a marriage reset, to really focus on, especially those 2 areas. Okay. Then number 6, this is the fun stuff, is build your romance keys. So a study done a few years ago to determine why some couples seem to keep that in love feeling even when they're older, was what they discovered is that couples that stayed in love when they were older, they had 3 qualities. They had emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, and friendship. So they considered themselves really good friends. They were close emotionally, and they were physically close, and they made love often. So a couple of tips on how to build these romance keys. Emotional intimacy comes a lot when we can share honestly with each other. And I don't mean sharing how you're bothered by things, not sharing your anger or whatever of what's not being done. Share yourself, like who you are, allowing yourself to be open and sharing how you're feeling or what you want is a very powerful strategy. I don't know if some of you grabbed, I do have some sheets that I've done up to encourage people to ask questions and build that intimacy. I did include those if you signed up through the link. So I'll just let you, if you haven't got those yet, just to let you know those are there. The other thing that you can do for romance keys is making love. That is a powerful thing between a man and a woman. And then friendship. So if you're good friends, that goes a long ways as well. Okay. And step number 7 is embrace your differences. So when my husband and I first got married, I used to actually Google married to your opposite into the Google machine. And I was desperate to understand how to handle being married to someone that's completely different than me in almost every way. So just a few little examples, like my husband is very athletic, and I am definitely not athletic, but I'm very literary. I'm an English major. I am a definite introvert, and he is a complete extrovert. At the time, he listened to heavy metal music, and I loved ballads, singer-songwriter. So you get the idea. We were just as different as you can probably find of a couple. But one of the things that as I did my Googling, because I tend to do a lot of research, I started to realize that there is a truth that your differences can really become your strengths. So just as an example, if you and your spouse seem like total opposites, like just use one example. Say you are very much a spender and you like to just go for it. Like, let's make money and spend money. Like, you don't want to be held back. You want to get things done and you're willing to spend to do it. And let's say your spouse is very cautious with money and very disciplined. When the two of you first get married, that's going to be probably an issue that you'll have to deal with and figure out. But in the end, there's a good chance you will probably be a bit more disciplined and your spouse will become a bit more spontaneous. So that's for tonight. That's the marriage reset roadmap. And I wanted to let you know, as I mentioned before, I am going to be offering a course. It's called the Marriage Reset Course. And it will focus on resetting your marriage after you've been through hard times, whatever that means to you. We'll be talking about a lot of the things that we talked about tonight, but just going into more depth with it. So this involves 1.5 hours to 2 hours a week for 8 weeks. Every week we'll focus on one of the steps of the marriage reset, and there will be optional small homework assignments, which will encourage you to practice during the week. In week 1, we would do assessments and introductions, finding out where you are now. So a lot of, I have assessments I use to find out what are the kind of the hard points of your marriage. Then week 2, why did we marry? So I have some exercises to help really uncover those reasons as to why we married and try to get back in touch with them. Week 3 is healing. So it's getting real. It's really looking at ways that we may still be hurting, whether it's through trauma that we went through or grief, previous marriages, or whatever it is, just to uncover that and to find ways to express it. Week 4 would be advanced healing, and that is ownership. So it's really seeing what our part is and the things that happen to us, and then forgiving, which can be a really hard one. Week 5, we're going to look at quench the fighting. So this is a better way of conflict. So really looking in and zoning in on communication and conflict strategies. Week 6 is 3 keys of romance. So it's talking about the things like getting more intimacy, physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, and becoming better friends. Week 7, we would really do a zone in on like how you and your spouse are different or the same. I would also be offering with this course an analysis of couples to find out where your strengths are and how they work together and how your differences are and where how that all fits together. So I'm going to be offering like a personal analysis for every couple that takes part in the program. Then week 8, it will be next steps, reaching out, and then your final assessments, and then just kind of finishing up whatever we didn't cover through the rest of the time. I'm also going to be offering some step family and remarriage resources and worksheets because I know a lot of people that have signed up with me and stuff are coming in through a second marriage. So there'll be some resources for that as well as bonuses. You'll have access to a private Facebook community with participants only. And I am limiting the group to 20 people only. If there's less, that's okay too. But I don't want to have a big group. I just want it to be a really small group that, we can hopefully get to know each other a bit. There's going to be no pressure to share or anything. You just do the work, but we do the work together. We do the work together so that we can sort of have that sense of community, but there's no obligation to share when you're in the group either. And you can come alone or with your spouse. The price is exactly the same. So if couples want to sign up, one of them will sign up and then the other one would have it as there would be no different. So the price is the same whether you come alone or with your spouse. The Zoom calls would be 1.5 to 2 hours every week. And then there would be a weekly Q&A session where you can ask questions privately, and then I would answer in a video. So this is a marriage reset course. It's $197 for 8 weeks of support. and it goes from July 14th to September 8th. And there's also 2 payments of $110 for 8 weeks of support.